Hello everyone, I'm Ushenya Peiris from Faculty of Agriculture, University of Peradeniya. This is from RELI BIMEN SAMA BIMATA, an education program conducted by the Faculty of Agriculture to aid the O-level and A-level students in their studies. So today we are going to talk about interpretation of graphs. So as you guys already know, interpretation of graphs in the English paper, it is usually in the part 2, which will be either question number 14 or 15, which will allocate you around 10 marks for your paper. And also this is selective question where you can choose either between from a letter and describing a graph. So for the letter you will get either informal letter or a formal letter to write, and here you get to describe a graph which can be either pie chart or a bar graph or something like that. So in comparing between these two questions, why you should choose the interpretation of graph question instead of the letter. Here in the graph question, what you have to do is to describe the graph that is given. What the examiner is looking for in the answer of that you have written is that whether you have correctly identified each and every detail that is there, that is present in the graph and the question itself, and you are able to write down and describe what is given in the question and the graph. But in a letter, can be a formal or informal letter, you have to write down your opinions, you have to use better vocabulary, if you have to describe stuff that is given, you have to write stuff that is not given in the question and the details that they have provided. But here you are getting marks even to the simple things that you are writing. Maybe from the maximum amount of a graph, when you are writing down the maximum amount is this, you are getting marks for that. So likewise, it is really easy to get marks for this question, because what you have to do is, as I said, just to describe what is given in the question and the graph or the chart. So it is really easy. Let's see what we got to do in this answer. So first let's see what are the main types of graphs. In terms of the graphs, there are three types of graphs: line graphs, pie charts, and bar graphs. So these line graphs are quite a bit complicated, so that's why in the question paper for the O-levels, what we get is either a pie chart or a bar graph. So both of these graphs are easy, and let's see how we should go through this graph. So the main steps. First, we have to read and understand the title of the graph. What is the title of the graph? As we all know, even in every type of essays that we write, any type of article that we write, we use a title to represent the whole text that we are writing. It can be an essay, it can be an article, as I said. So to represent the whole text that we are writing or we are representing, it is the representation of all the text as in one single line or few words as a phrase, which is we called as a title. So in the graph folder, we have a title which is usually given at the top of the graph, or mostly in the O-level papers we can see in the question itself they are mentioning the title. So sometimes you might not find the title itself on the graph, but it can be on the question. But sometimes usually we have to mention it on the graph itself. So as in the first step, what we have to do is to read and understand the title of the graph. So here in this bar graph, it is really a simple graph, right? In your papers, what you get on your O-level papers is not this type of a simple graph, but just to make you understand what the title is and what we have to do in terms of the title, I'm just using this graph. So here in this graph, we can see the title says favorite type of movie. So we just read it and we have to understand what does the title say. So just by reading this, since this is really simple, we can understand this graph is representing what are the favorite types of movies. Maybe it can be from a particular amount of people, particular group of people that they have taken the data from. So what this graph is representing, what this graph is describing is about the favorite type of movie among few people. So that is the first step that we should do. We should read and understand what is the title of the graph, which means what does the graph, what does this pie chart or the bar graph represent? What does this whole graph, what is the meaning? Why does they are talking about this? Why and what is the reason behind using this pie chart or the bar graph, which is represented through the title? So first we have to read and understand the title of the graph. In the second step, we have to do is, if there are keys, we have to check them out. What are the keys? We usually say keys in the terms of both line graphs, bar graphs, or also in the pie charts as well. So let's just forget about the line graph, but just to make sure that you understand what the keys are, I will use this line graph as well. So the keys are, you can see there are a red line, a green dotted line, and a blue dashed line. So in both these lines, we should understand what these lines are. What does this line represent? For that, we should know, because there are 3 lines already. So we should know what does this line represented separately from each other. That's why they are given in a separate manner or on the graph itself the keys. So we should know these keys. We just have to check them out, just read through. And even in the bar chart there are, here you can see there are some colors, and in the keys that they have mentioned in, they have to mention what does these colors represent. So even in a pie chart, usually in the O-level papers, we get bar chart or a pie chart, as I said. So in the pie chart, what they usually do is that they use some objects like circles, shapes, likewise, or a dashed line, a dotted line, or likewise each slices, if you can know, as you already know that there are slices that are there in the pie chart. So in this pie chart, where they are mentioning in a separate manner the keys they are mentioning, whether what does this slice of having dotted lines or the dashes or the circles or the squares, likewise the shapes, what does it represent? So these keys, you have to check them out. In terms of the third step, you have to read and understand the labels. What does the 2 axes represent and what does the bars represent in terms of the bar graph? Let's just check for a while. So first, let's see what are the labels. In this step, as I said, we have to read and understand the labels. So when we see what the labels are, we can see here comedy, action, romance, drama, scientific, likewise, and here you can see people is mentioned. Then there are a few numbers on this y-axis. So these are what we call as labels. So here we have to know what does these bars represent, which means we have to understand these labels. We have to know what does this x-axis represent and what does this y-axis represent. Here, since the title mentions as favorite type of movie, we can see from the x-axis these labels means the types of the movie. It can be a comedy movie, it can be an action movie, it can be a romance movie, drama movie, or a scientific. Not a drama movie, I guess it's a drama, so, and a scientific movie. So likewise, these are in this x-axis, what does it represent is the favorite types of movies, the types of movies. So to know what are the favorite type, the y-axis is there where the number of people who are interested in comedy, either action or romance, likewise for a particular type of movie, how many people are there. So that's what is represents by the y-axis, which means which is there to enhance the title mentioning as favorite type of movie. How they have find the favorite type? Through mentioning the y-axis as the number of people who are interested in this particular type of movie. So likewise, we should understand these labels. We first just read through the labels and we have to understand what does these labels represent. What are the data that these labels are representing. So, as we did earlier, we have to know what are the 2 types of data that a pie chart or a bar graph is representing through understanding the labels that are given in the pie chart or the bar graph. So, there can be colors or percentages that is there, which are also labels. So, which we have to know what are those labels are representing, where we can understand, from which we can understand the graph as a whole. And to describe a graph, we should first understand. So for that, we should know what are the labels and what does those labels represent. So from this pie chart, let's take one pie chart, the smartphone pie chart. So what is the title? The title says time spent on smartphones and tablets by category. So from that, what are the labels in this pie chart? Games is a label, 35% is a label, social networking is a label, 29% is a label. Likewise, all these 2 types of labels that is given representing each and every slice are called as labels. So these labels are what? Representing the data sets that are obtained to draw this pie chart. So that's how we should understand what are the data sets and the labels that are given through this. So through understanding the labels that are given, we must be able to understand the data set. So here, games, social networking, utilities, these are like the apps or categories. So as we understood from the title, which we did from the first step, time spent on smartphone and tablets by category. So the games, other, news are likewise, these must be the categories or apps the time was spent on. So which is one of the data set, and the second one type of data set is the time. 35%, 5%, 3%. These must be the time which was spent on each particular slice, which means each particular category or the app. So these are the two types of data that these labels are representing. So that's how that we should understand about the labels, and through the labels how we are going to understand the data sets that are represented through these pie charts. So in terms with the fourth step, what we have to do is to study and to understand the graph. So what is this studying and understanding of a graph means, and why should we do this? Because don't forget, what the examiner, the markers are requesting, what they are expecting from our answer is that we have correctly identified each and every details that is given in the pie chart or the bar graph, and we have correctly write down all those. So to write down correctly, we should understand and we should identify the trends and the particular data which is special, which is important, which we have to identify properly, which is given in the pie chart and the bar graph, which we can see that, okay, now these examiners are expecting us to write about this. So we should first understand the graph by studying it well. So for that, we have to know what is the maximum amount, what is the minimum amount, and we have to know about the topic and the amount separately. Now if you can remember the last pie chart we found, the pie chart on smartphone usage, if you can remember, the maximum was spent for games, right? It was 35%. So we should know the topic. We should know that the maximum time was spent on games, and the time was around 35%, right? Actually, we cannot use the word around because it is particularly given as 35%. So sorry about that. So maximum amount should be 35% and the topic is games. Likewise, the simple details we should know: what is the maximum, what is the minimum. Like if you can remember, the minimum was 8%, which was others. So likewise, and if there are any similar number in pie chart or bar graph. In pie chart also there can be having similar slice size or the similar percentages, and also in the bar graph if there are bars with same height, which means they're from the y axis they are having the same amount, which means that they are having similar amounts. So we should know such kind of trends. If there are any similar amounts, if there are maximum, minimum, we should know about that, and also about the other bars and sections, about those other bars and section from their amounts and the topics as well. Because in this answer, in this question, in our answer, we should write about everything that is given, everything that is really important to write down. Not like the other question in this selective question number 14, which is the letter. We have to write in the letter, as I said, we have to write down things that is not even given. But here in this graph, we have to write down everything that is given, but not more, not less. So we have to write down every detail that is given, and which is really important, that we should not miss any special detail, any special trend that is given in the graph. So in the fourth step, as in the fourth and the last step, which these 4 steps, don't forget, these 4 steps are only pre-steps that we are doing before starting to writing, right? First step, if you can remember, first what we did was to read out and to understand the title, and the second was to, if there are any keys, we have to find them out and we have to just go through those keys as well. And the third step, what we did, in the third step, we found out if there are any labels, we have to check out the labels and we have to know what are those labels are representing. And in the fourth step and the last step, we are just going through the graph or the pie chart. We are seeing if there are any special trends, if there are maximum amount, if there are minimum amount. We're just going through those in order to start writing. So that's what we have to do before starting to write. There's all these steps have to be done within few seconds, and I should say that it must be within 30 seconds to 1 minute, because we do not have much time. We should start writing. So before that, those 4 steps was done within 30 seconds to 1 minute, because from those 4 steps what we did was just to understand the graph, which is really important as well. But what they have, what the examiners, the marking examiners are looking for is what we have written, right? So to write those stuff, we should first understand the graph. So from those 4 steps, what we did was to understand the graph. So we should do it as quick as possible, soon as possible, so that we can move on to writing. So before moving on to the writing, I will just go through some do's and don'ts on the question, on the answer. So try not to copy sentences from the question given, because when people are copying the exact same sentences given on the question paper, on the question itself, the examiners get bored, right? When they see that the same thing has been copied here, they get the feeling that this student is not using their words to write it. So that's why we should not copy the sentences from the question. Also, we have to use new words in describing, and the second and third both points represent the same stuff. Do not use same verb, noun, adverb, adjective in describing 2 different sections or bars. Try to use different words. Try to use new words in describing, because in the same sense as I said earlier, we should ensure that the examiner, the ones who are marking our paper, is interested in reading. When he or she is going through our answer, he or she should be interested, because what we have used, the vocabulary we have used, is interesting. We have not copied sentences from the question. We have not used the same verbs, adjectives, as in if I said, if the answer was the maximum amount was spent on this, the minimum amount was spent on this. Just think, if we are writing like that, it will be really bored, right? It will be really boring. It is not interesting. So that will reduce our mark, because what is the most important is the expression that the examiner has about our answer. So, and the next one is, do not write any information that is not given, and do not write your opinion. So in those 4th and 5th, I already described it earlier as well, because on the answer, what we have to write is not what we think. We should not write our opinions, just like in the first answer. Sorry, the earlier question, the informal or formal letters. There we can write our opinions describing what they have given the question. But here, in this question, we just have to describe what is given on the graph. We should not write any of our opinions, and we should not write any information that is not given. Just as an example, if we took that pie chart, right? So we should not include any details like most of the people, the time was spent on games, which is around 30%. Yeah, it was 35%. So if we should not write like at the most time spent on games is due to the addiction that is found in the modern culture. Likewise, we should not write those stuff, because if it's not given on the question, if it's not mentioned on the graph, you should not write those. You should not write your opinions. And also, never mistake the amounts, numbers, names, topics of data, because this question, writing this answer is really easy, and it is really easy to get the marks, because what you are doing is just describing what is given on the graph. So you just don't have to write your opinion. You just don't have to describe stuff. You just have to write down what is given on the graph. You just making sure that all the details given in the graph is there on the answer. So do not mistake any amounts or numbers, because it's really easy to take because the amounts or the topics that is there, it's as an example, the maximum amount is this. So you are getting a mark for being able to identify that this is the maximum. So that's how you're getting marks. So if you just by mistake, if you did not write the correct amount for the maximum amount, you're losing marks for that. So it is really easy to catch marks for this answer, but if you mistake, it is really a waste. So do not mistake the amounts, numbers, names, or topics in the data sets. And also, do not change the tense throughout along the text. Make sure that you use the same tense throughout the answer. Then let's start with writing. First, we should describe the topic as we did earlier in the pre-steps, 4 pre-steps we did. In the first step, we read and understood the topic, right? So, we have to describe the topic. When we are starting the answer, when we are starting to write the answer, first we have to do is to describe the topic. So, and also we have to describe, in the second step, we have to describe the graph details. What are the data types that are given? What are the axes that are there? And the colors. In a total sense, we have to describe starting from the topic and the graph details, because that is how we are given a small introduction to our answer, because our answer should be perfect. So first we are describing the topic and then we are describing the graph details. So here the expenses by month is given. So first we are describing the topic. So first we should say, what does this graph is saying? The topic is representing like this. So we should say, this graph represents, or this graph describes, the expenses by month in the months from January to April. So that's how I would describe the topic. So likewise, you should describe the topic and the graph details, the axes. So here you can see in the x-axis it is mentioned in 4 months, and here you can see the amount that is spent, the money is mentioned. So you can explain those details, and also you can mention that the expenses are given according to the amount that is spent on gasoline, food, rent, and utilities. What you're just writing is what is there on the graph itself. You just writing them down in a sentence, which is here where there is only data, but in your answer you are writing them as in sentences. So you just writing that you just describe the topic and you are going for the graph details, where you are saying that in the graph they have taken 4 months, which is from January to April, and also they have mentioned the expenses as in dollars. If usually here this is not a complete graph, but in your graph, in your paper, which will be given on rupees or dollars, USD or whatever they will give, so you can mention that as well. And again in the next sentences or in the same sentence you can mention these expenses, the amounts are mentioned in terms with gasoline, food, rent, and utilities. Likewise, you can explain what are the graph details. Make sure that these lines are not so long, because it is just a small introduction before starting off. And to describe these stuff, what I said earlier, I would give you few vocabulary. So here in the vocabulary you can see few words, right? Instead of using the same word as I said earlier to do's and don'ts, I said as a do, you have to make sure that the marking examiner is interested in your answer. You should not use the same word again and again. You should use new words. So make sure that you have few words in your head that you can use whenever you want. Likewise, here are some words that you can use instead of just saying this graph describes, this graph represents. Don't use the same words. You can use new words. Suggest, indicates, illustrates, represents, provide information, which you can use like the graph provide information on expenses by month. Likewise, you can continue. Likewise, or demonstrates, reveals, gives information about, describes, depicts, shows, displays, and etc. So these are few words that I guess which will be important for you, because you will have to mention new words, different words, but make sure the place that you're going to use the words are correct, right? Do not use whenever you want. Just make sure that the correct positioning of words is correct, right? So these words are words that you can use instead of just saying describes or represents. You can use these words to describe the topic and the other graph details as we talked earlier. And then as the next step, we should describe the details. What are the maximum? What is the minimum? And what is if there are any same amounts as we talked earlier, if there are any similar amounts, what are they? And give the amounts and the topics for those. So for the maximum, minimum as well, you can say the maximum amount was spent on gasoline on this month. Likewise, we can give the amount and the topic accordingly when checking through the graph. So that in that sense also we can use few words instead of saying the maximum is this, the minimum is this, we can use new words. So here for the maximum, there are a few words I have given. Instead of using just maximum, you can use the greatest amount, the topmost amount, the highest amount, the maximal, the most, and even for the next amounts, you can use second most, the third most, which means the most is the first, which is the maximum, and the second most is the second having the maximum after the second place, and the third most is the third place in terms with the maximum amount. And also in the vocabulary, for the same or equal amounts, you can see the same amount is spent on this month for this, or the expenses spent on this month is equal to the expenses spent on this month. Likewise, identical, equivalent, one and the same. Likewise, these words you can use instead of using same or equal. You can use same amount, equal to, identical, equivalent, or one and the same. And for the minimum also, instead of using just minimum all of the paragraph, you can use lowest, least, minimum, smallest number, and less. So these are words that you can use. Instead of using the same words, make sure that you add new words, because this is really easy, because you just have to describe what is there on the graph itself. You just have to make sure that you have good vocabulary and the tense and the positioning of words and also the flow. As I said, do not forget the flow. First, what we did, if you can remember, what we did is to describe the topic. Second, we described the graph details. Third, only we went to the details, deep in details, which means the maximum, minimum, similar amounts likewise. And then for describing those words, for the describing of the minimum, maximum, similar amounts and other amounts, we can use few words, right? You can just go through this vocabulary where the whereas, while, although, in comparison with, when we are comparing to, and different from, which are different. The expenses spent on this month is different from this month because the expenses for gasoline is higher. Likewise, you can use few words with regards to, in terms of, in relative to, gap, respectively, because we can use these are just describing words. You can use them whenever you want correctly by positioning the words, the number of, the proportion. So the proportion you can use mostly on the pie when you're describing about a pie chart as well. The information on, the data on, the percentage of, and the rate of. So these words you can use while describing through the answer. And we are next going to describe the other details. If you can remember, first I'm just repeating it again. Describe the topic, describing the graph details, describing the main amounts, which means the maximum, minimum, and similar amounts. And then we are describing the other details, which means the other amounts, other topics and data, which means not the maximum, not the minimum, not the similar amounts, but others. So we can compare 2 or 3 terms as well. We are just describing other details, and we are to enhance the quality of our writing, we can compare 2 or 3 trends, which means the expenses spent on January is more than expenses spent on February. Likewise, we can compare 2 or 3 months in that particular graph. Likewise, you can compare 2 or 3 trends, which will increase the amount that you have written, also increasing the quality of your answer. So for comparing, there are a few words I have given here, but in terms of vocabulary: more than, less than, much lower, much higher, comparatively less, and dramatically high. Just say, without using the same words like more than, less than, we can use these types of words as well. Comparatively less, which means do not use such words when comparatively less means when there is a huge difference. So do not use this particular word when you are saying it as just a small gap between them. Do not use, but instead you can use comparatively less when comparatively less, or comparatively high, likewise when there is a huge gap. And also dramatically high, which also means when there is a huge difference, when there's a huge gap. You can use those words in comparing to enhance the vocabulary of yours, to make sure that your quality of your answer is high. And also there are some quantity words that I have given here in the vocabulary. The same amount, the majority, the minority, around. When you are using around is when we are not sure, because in some time the y-axis will not give each and every digit, which means like we cannot exactly say whether it is 25.5 or 25.6 likewise. So instead we can say around 25.5. Likewise we can use almost, roughly, larger, higher, smaller, fewer, less, lower, greater, more, and even we can use double or triple, because just think when you use different types of conflicting words, like when as an example for double and triple, you can use if you can see that the expenses spent for gasoline in the month of February is double than the expenses spent for gasoline on the month of January. So if you can see that's what we did in studying the graph in the pre-steps. If you can remember, the fourth steps what we did was to understand the graph, to maximum, minimum, other details and other simple trends inside the graph. So that's when you understand in those. So if you found such of a data, you can write it. You can write that the amount spent on gasoline on the month of March is double than the amount spent on gasoline in the month of January. Likewise, because by that the examiner, the marker, does know that you have correctly identified the trends inside the graph. You have caught each and every small detail in the graph. So that's why the first four steps are really important, because you understand the graph from that. So through the using of quantity words, you can use like that, as I said, double, triple, as, twice as, many, much, equal, likewise. And then there's a special note. If the chart gives information about a time period, that can be years, months, dates, even, or time. It can be time within a day as well. We can use different types of a word category to enhance the quality of our paragraph. Here you can see the time it is a graph which represent the UK telephone calls by category within the years 1995 to 2002, which is a type of a time to some kind of other data set comparing. So here you can use a different types of a different type of vocabulary to ensure that your quality of writing is high. So what are those? When there is a direction upwards, which means there is a rise, there is an increment, which means an increment, you know what is an increment, is an increase. There is an increase in the UK telephone calls in 2001 than 1996. So likewise, so you can, if there is a direction upwards, you can use rose or rise, increased, or you can say there is an increase. So it is the verb and the adjective itself. And went up, an increment is there, a dramatic rise is there, an upward trend can be observed, likewise a growth is there. And in the same sense, when the direction is downwards, there is a fell or a decrease. The amount of UK telephone calls has declined or dropped, or you can say there is a drop that can be observed in this particular year. There's a reduction, a slump, or reached rock bottom, went down, likewise. And there also, if there are no change or a similar amount, you can say it has remained stable, it has stayed constant, or maintained the same level, leveled out, or did not change. And so likewise you can use different type of vocabulary to enhance your answer. And then for some other words to enhance your writing, we can use different types of adjectives, like dramatic, which means there's comparatively a huge difference, as I said earlier, and a sharp, huge, enormous, steep, substantial, considerable, which is also meaning as dramatic, significant, in the same meaning again, slight, which is just a slight difference, a small difference, and a gradual, where there is a gradual decrease, a gradual increase, likewise. So these are the adjectives that you can use in enhancing your verbs that we're using inside your writing. So, and also there can be reporting phrases that you can use within your answer. as reported in this research or the graph, according to the data, it can be seen that that chart shows that likewise. And also other categorizing words like variety, type, trend, figure, sample, category, amount, number, quantity. Just don't use the same amount, like same words like amount. Use the word quantity as well. Use the use the word number as well. Likewise, just use different types of words, different type of categorizing words. So again, then if a pie chart was given, there's a special note to use that you can use percent instead of using the percentage sign. Here you can see 50%, the percentage sign is given, or you can write it as percent. Do not do not miswrite on the answer sheet as percent. It is percent. It is 2 words, so make sure that if you're writing in words, make sure that you write like that, because it is always better to write in words than using the symbol. So try to write in this, or even this will be fine. And also you can use proportional words. The proportional words means a quarter, a third, 2/3. Like you can see there are proportions here. The slices according to how much of amount that he has separated through a third, a 2/3, a 3/4, a fifth, or a sixth. Likewise, you can use proportional words to describe the pie chart. If you can see that there is a different, like if there is a comparatively, you can see that there is a trend that we can use proportional words you can use proportional words in that type of situation. And there are some other common phrases that you can use: the proportion of, the percentage of, a significant majority, the slice of. So likewise, you can use other common phrases as well. So why I'm giving this vocabulary is to make sure that your answer on your paper is interested to read. So the expression that the examiner has on your answer is high, that he or she is willing to give you marks because you have used correct words with the correct flow, because as you can remember the flow that we came through, and with good vocabulary and the same tense throughout. So that's how you're getting a perfect answer for your answer script. So then, hope you do well on that question, and good luck on your exam.